The title of Duke of Rothesay and the other Scottish titles which I've had the honour to carry for so long, I now pass to Catherine.
I now give Catherine the title of Duke of Rothesay and all the other Scottish titles I have had the privilege of holding for so long. Before King Charles had started talking, the room became quiet. Beneath his palm was a sealed paper with instructions that would reverse years of royal expectations. Charles made his last request as his family gathered in great secrecy and his strength began to wane. Camilla would lose all power associated with his rule, and Catherine would be the only successor to his personal royal authority. Grief was not the only thing that came next. It was a familial goodbye wrapped in a constitutional earthquake. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we go further into what this really implies for the royal family. In a room at Windsor Castle, Charles called William, Catherine, Camilla, Princess Anne, and 2 legal counsel. Inside, no assistance was permitted. This decision was made by the family. Catherine was appointed sole successor to the king's estates, archives, family trusts, ceremonial influence, and remaining authority in the royal directive, a written command governing the king's private property and household powers. Additionally, it took away Camilla's ability to make any decisions after his death. William held onto a chair. He had anticipated that the document would bolster his control going forward. However, Charles entrusted Catherine with his delicate inheritance. Stunned by the weight bearing down on her, the future king turned to face his bride. Catherine didn't rejoice. Accepting the bequest meant bearing the monarch's trust while seemingly displacing the lady next to him, which is why she seemed afraid. While an advisor read the removal provision out loud, Camilla did not move. Had years of devotion been condensed into a single signature, she inquired? Charles remained silent. His quiet was more painful than his rage. A darker phrase followed. Following the breach of trust at Balmoral, her removal had become essential. The princess understood as Catherine turned to face Anne. She was aware of what had transpired there. Leaning closer, Catherine declined. She was unable to accept his authority at Camilla's cost since she had never requested it. Setting down the pen, Charles informed her that this was not a prize. After his death, it served as security for the monarchy. The bequest was intended to prevent the following reign from being dominated by private competition. Charles's hand was shaky as he signed the last page. Before Camilla could access the documents, and closed the folder. The class closed abruptly. As the conference came to a close, Catherine was given a second sealed envelope that was dated 6 months prior, the night in Balmoral, when the king had concluded that his wife could no longer be trusted with the future of the throne. However, Catherine had to face the 3 individuals whose lives had been shattered by Charles's last order before she could comprehend why he had selected her. Power seemed to be split between a winner and a loser by the edict. However, 3 individuals bearing 3 distinct types of suffering stood behind the royal language. Catherine was afraid of the power she had acquired. Camilla had lost what she thought would be a safe future. William had seen his father entrust his bride with the most delicate inheritance of the monarchy. None of them felt triumphant when they left Windsor. There had been no celebration of Charles's last desire. No title could hide the familial disaster it had caused. For years, Catherine had established herself as the stable head of the royal family, gaining Charles's confidence via self-control, discipline, and a natural ability to defend the institution without coming off as power-hungry. She had always been expected by the monarchy, the royal system of family roles, responsibilities, property, and public duty, to stand next to William rather than above the household with independent power. This difference was crucial because whatever authority she took on might now be used as evidence that she had secretly orchestrated Camilla's demise. Camilla had planned for an entirely different future. She felt that being married to Charles would provide her respect, a place to live, employees, and a voice to advise her after his passing. Even though William and Catherine headed the subsequent reign, the queen consort anticipated becoming a respected royal widow who continued to be advised by the family. Now, that future had been snatched away in a single night by the signed order, leaving her institutionally helpless but personally protected. Alone with William, Catherine opened the folder, but before she could turn the first page, her hand started to tremble. She shut it and acknowledged that she had been targeted by Charles in the form of a crown. While Camilla was grieving and humiliated, the future queen worried being seen as cunning. William was proud of his wife, but the prince was unable to put his own pain aside. Did his father trust her more than his own son, he questioned? In response, Catherine said that the choice could have shielded him from a confrontation with his stepmother. When William confronted Anne about Balmoral, she did not give any consolation. The princess had assisted Charles in drafting the order, and it was clear from her silence that she knew far more than she was willing to admit. She said that Camilla had been given one more opportunity to demonstrate her allegiance when the future king persisted. She had not succeeded. Camilla took a scribbled list out of a drawer and locked herself in her bedroom. It included charity trustees, estate managers, and senior courtiers whose assistance she anticipated after Charles's death. The king's handwriting had many names crossed out. Later, when Catherine heard the queen consort sobbing, she halted her approach to the door. Then she heard the words she would never forget. "The lady who has been given my life would never show Camilla sympathy." At last, William cracked open the Balmoral envelope. Charles had penned a single phrase inside. "This started the night she tried to alter Catherine's position in the succession plan without my permission." The genuine split had started months earlier at a secret Balmoral ceremony that Charles would later refer to as the point of no return, but the edict had revealed the damage. The royal family convened in Balmoral for what seemed to be a private event honoring continuity and service 6 months before to the final proclamation. There was no public announcement, no crowds, and no cameras. However, Camilla made one request behind closed doors in the estate library that changed Charles's perception of their marriage forever. It wasn't a thoughtless comment or a little argument. Charles saw every word of the deliberate effort to change Catherine's destiny. William and Catherine had been given a symbolic transfer of certain domestic duties by Charles. The event was a private family pledge that demonstrated the next generation could defend the monarchy in the event that his health deteriorated, rather than a formal handover of the throne. The monarch desired confidence, not competition, therefore the difference was important. He desired consistency. Camilla saw something different. She saw Catherine emerging as the first person advisors trusted, while William's increasing power threatened to isolate her after her husband's death. Camilla urged Charles to change the family continuity pact after the others had moved aside. During a transition, the agreement was a confidential arrangement that specified who would oversee royal residences, archives, jewelry, and household choices. She insisted that Catherine's exercise of such powers be permanently vetoed. The moment of no return was reached. Charles inquired as to whether she wanted control or protection. In response, Camilla said that before Catherine can become a queen, she must discover that there are still queens. The king's expression became stern. He realized then that his wife no longer considered the future princess to be family. She saw her as a competitor who had to be subdued. Catherine heard her own name as she went into the next hallway to get a briefing packet. As Camilla questioned her judgment, her family history, and her authority to oversee royal property, she abruptly stopped. Catherine remained silent. She was heartbroken as she left, but she didn't confront Charles at a time when his health was already precarious. Her quiet shielded him, yet also concealed the hurt. Hours later, Anne discovered the next treachery. The princess discovered handwritten changes to the draft agreement that complied with Camilla's requests. These modifications would have required Catherine to get permission before using staff authority, mansions, archives, or jewelry. The Queen Consort's administration had already distributed guidelines regarding the revisions as accepted, even though Charles had never signed them, a senior courtier subsequently acknowledged via a recorded statement. And stood next to Charles as he took the modified draft to the fireplace. He informed his sister that Camilla had misinterpreted his affection for consent as he watched the papers burn. That evening, the king requested the princess to assist in drafting a final decree that would guarantee Catherine would never again be subject to his wife's authority. After the instruction was ultimately signed months later, Camilla was prepared to meet Catherine head-on since the long-forgotten Balmoral disagreement could no longer be concealed. Lawyers, advisors, and sympathetic courtiers were not called upon by Camilla. She called for Catherine. The two ladies went into a private sitting room and gave the order to lock the doors, only hours after Charles signed the decree. Their differences had been concealed for years behind royal formality, cautious gestures, and formal smiles. There was no ruler powerful enough to soften the truth, and no audience to impress. One lady thought someone had snatched her life. The other thought she had been compelled to bear the consequences. Catherine consented to the conference because she would not let resentment to permeate her family, advisors, and servants. She wanted to clarify that Camilla's personal dignity could still be preserved and that the choice had never been hers. Although power had been passed by the decree, a formal written order bearing the king's authority, cruelty was not necessary. That was important because, inside a bereaved royal family, any private slight might quickly turn into a public rift. She was not asked to reject the full bequest by Camilla. Putting a private undertaking on the table, she requested ownership of Clarence House, certain jewelry, invitations to ceremonies, and any records related to her years with Charles. Those items, according to the Queen Consort, were not privileges. They served as evidence that her time spent with the king had been significant. Catherine heard the charges. Camilla claimed to have waited years while the younger lady was seen by the public as the real future of the monarchy. She said that while letting Charles and William construct a new court around her, Catherine seemed humble. The words were powerful. Camilla needed Catherine to be her adversary, but she refused. She said that rather than defeating another woman, she had given up her privacy, health, and serenity in order to serve the kingdom. She cautioned that the last few months of Charles's life shouldn't be seen as a conflict between the two people who loved him the most. Her voice cracked. Camilla averted her gaze, but she remained unflinching. Then copies of private letters were generated by Camilla. According to the letters, before to the Balmoral incident, Catherine's advisors had spoken about restricting her future access. She cautioned that if they were released, Catherine would be held accountable for a premeditated cleansing. However, Catherine took her time reading and became aware of the missing pages. All mention of Charles's explicit directives had been eliminated. The Queen Consort wasn't only protecting herself. She was fabricating a story that would undermine Catherine's reputation. Camilla moved the project ahead and set a pen down next to it. After reading the whole paper, Catherine put the pen down without touching it and slid it back. She would not reinstate the powers Charles had purposefully taken away, but she did guarantee safety, respect, and dignity. The Queen Consort got up so fast that her chair scratched the ground. "Catherine has decided to go to war," she said. The door then opened. From the next room, Charles had had enough. After entering and examining the documents between them, the king demanded to see the communication Camilla had attempted to use against Catherine. Camilla's rage had been made clear by the encounter, but Charles's reaction would demonstrate who really had the ultimate say and how far he had gone to make it definitive. Charles's order was not the rash decision of a dying man. Months of covert legal planning, private family conversations, and strategically positioned protections meant to withstand any obstacle had gone into its construction. Camilla had believed that the king might still be coerced into making a compromise by emotional pressure, delay, or persuasion. She was mistaken. Charles had already given Catherine the keys, the signatures, and the allegiances that made royal authority genuine by the time she met her. It was more than just a written text. It was designed to last. Charles had established a distinct boundary between the constitutional succession and his own legacy. Catherine would be given supervision of private properties, archives, trusts, heirlooms, and family organizations, but William would continue to be the indisputable future sovereign, that is, the person constitutionally destined to inherit the throne. This division was important because it kept key royal assets under trusted management and shielded the next reign from charges of retaliation. Every protection had been shaped in part by Anne. The princess cautioned that when Charles left, the command may be reinterpreted by Camilla's staff due to ambiguous phrasing. She demanded that certain homes, monies, collections, appointment powers, and recordings be named in the decree. Knowing that big pledges may be broken, postponed, or subtly disregarded, the king consented. Silently, Charles read the revised letter. Then he confessed to Catherine that Camilla had been shielded from criticism by him for so long that she had mistaken protection for enduring power. The king did not sound furious. He sounded worn out. He was aware that his own decisions had contributed to the problem, and his quiet had enabled terror to take over. Catherine refused to submit to unbridled authority. She warned Charles that total control may harm her in the same way that Camilla had been harmed by insecurity. The future queen demonstrated her desire for accountability rather than dominance by asking William and Anne to supervise important choices. The king seemed to be relieved. He explained to her that he had trusted her because of her hesitation. The legal advisors then verified that the private trusts had previously undergone restructuring via a written briefing. These trusts were safeguarded agreements that went beyond standard palace management to govern funds, real estate, and family assets. Without disclosing the unapproved Balmoral orders and the selectively altered letters she had used against Catherine, Camilla was unable to contest the transfer. At last, Charles gave an explanation for William's exclusion from the process. He did not want anybody to accuse his son of punishing his stepmother with the future throne, and was to act as a witness and guardian, while Catherine was to be the independent caretaker. Charles took a little key out of a chain inside his jacket and put it in Catherine's hand. It unlocked the exclusive archive that had his last correspondence and sealed family directives. She started crying as she wrapped her fingers around it. She was urged by the monarch to protect the family without protecting its heirs. And then got confirmation. At midnight, Camilla's appointment rights, financial power, and staff access would expire. After midnight, Charles's request ceased to be a personal proclamation and became a new directive that all members of the home, workplace, and family were compelled to follow. The palace did not descend into turmoil at midnight. Silence made a difference. Access cards ceased to function. There were no longer any private instructions. Employees were notified via sealed notifications that Catherine now had the power that had previously been used through Camilla's office. There were simply shut doors and changed names on official lists, no trumpets, proclamations, or ceremonial witnesses. The greatest embarrassment for Camilla was not learning that her authority was disappeared. It was grasping for accustomed advantages only to find that they had forgotten who she was. Household administrators were directly instructed to give Catherine authority over private homes, archives, trust funds, ceremonial collections, and family appointments. Charles's signature and Anne's confirmation accompanied the official transfer of power from one royal office to another, known as the administrative transfer. That was important because neither a courtier nor an advisor could dismiss it as transient. The new order was genuine, instantaneous, and delay-proof. Camilla had not been deprived of respect. Her privilege to dwell in a designated royal residence, as well as her own income, security, and belongings, were all kept safe. Charles had established a clear distinction between institutional authority and individual caring. He wouldn't desert his wife, but he wouldn't let her be in charge of the monarchy after he was gone. Early the next morning, Camilla had to confront that reality. She pushed her access card against the door as she made her way to the secret records room she had been in for years. There was a red light. The Queen Consort made another attempt. Only Catherine, William, Anne, and authorized archivists could now enter, a guard she intimately knew stated, lowering his eyes. The rejection followed her down the hallway even if she remained silent. A few minutes later, Catherine got the first packet that needed her signature. She was unable to sit at Charles's desk. Standing, the future queen signed, certain that each power she exercised validated yet more privilege Camilla had forfeited. It seemed like an act of sorrow, even if others may have rejoiced at the triumph. A new danger was then revealed by the inventory. Balmoral's correspondence was missing from one red dispatch box. Confidential royal documents were kept in a safe container called a dispatch box. Records indicated that it was last given to Camilla's personal secretary before to the signing of the decree. Soon after, one of Camilla's longest-serving assistants gave a private recorded call. The assistant acknowledged that certain documents had been taken out because the Queen Consort was afraid Catherine would reveal years of covert activities and volunteered to restore the box. When Camilla arrived at her morning office, she was anticipating a comprehensive briefing, but there was only one secretary there. They had cleared the other desks. She inquired whether Catherine had given the order for the removals, touching the back of an empty chair. The secretary replied that each reassignment had been signed by Charles personally. Now Catherine had the power to fire the rest of the family. Rather, asked Camilla for one last private encounter. Now that all formal barriers had been lifted, Catherine and Camilla would reunite. Instead of being competitors encircled by royal machinery, they were two ladies confronting the cost of Charles's last desire. There was none of the anger from their first encounter in their second. The royal folder was absent when Catherine arrived. Camilla showed up without making any demands. Beyond the door, no counselors were waiting. No assistants sent communications between them, and no solicitors took notes. The two ladies talked without utilizing the monarchy as a shield or a weapon for the first time since Charles's declaration. It was no longer antagonistic, yet the quiet between them was still unpleasant. It was the quiet of two individuals at last facing the same impending loss. Catherine was the first to speak. She had not come to undermine Charles's order or restore power that the monarch had purposefully taken away. It was up to her to choose whether Camilla's future inside the family would be characterized by protected dignity or humiliation. The lady behind the title might continue to receive sympathy while the directive, the official edict governing royal property, access, and home authority, remained unaltered. Camilla knew the battle was finished. No private pressure could change the decision, as shown by empty offices, barred doors, and transferred workers. Since the loss of power had already occurred, the queen consort no longer worried losing it. She was afraid she would just be known as the wife Charles had lost faith in. In their secret tape talk, Camilla eventually acknowledged that Balmoral had been motivated by fear. She thought that as soon as the king passed away, Catherine's growing power would obliterate her. It was intolerable to become invisible again, so she attempted to manipulate the future queen. The confession was the unvarnished reality of a woman who had confused terror for self-preservation. It had no justification. Catherine did not conceal her personal injury. She said that Camilla's behavior had put more than just her authority in jeopardy. Years of devotion had seemed pointless to them. She had wondered if the family had ever really been at peace or whether every smile had been a cover for a more subdued conflict after listening in on the Balmoral chat. Then Camilla put the red dispatch box that was missing between them. The whole communication from Balmoral, which demonstrated that Charles had overseen the first efforts to lessen her authority, was in the locked container. Although Catherine would be totally cleared if those documents were made public, the queen consort's reputation would be ruined. Catherine sealed and shut the box. She assured Camilla that the letters would be kept confidential unless Camilla contested the order or questioned the king's motivations. The future queen declined to get retribution. Power would not turn into a form of punishment. During one of the most trying times in their marriage, Camilla took off a ring that Charles had given her. She said that she had desired his affection in order to secure a long-term position inside the organization while holding it in her hand. Catherine assured her that love, although it was brittle, their tranquility was genuine. The family conflict was resolved by their private accord, but outside the palace gates, Charles's last request was set to become the most dramatic royal proclamation of the time. By dawn, Windsor had lost ownership of the secret. Newspaper presses substituted one stunning photograph for their intended front pages, throngs gathered at royal gates, and newsrooms paused scheduled broadcasts. Carrying Charles's sealed archive key, Catherine exits the castle. The nation was responding to more than just an inheritance. It was seeing the public fall of the previous hierarchy. Catherine was a symbol of stability to some. Camilla's removal seemed brutal to others. However, a single scene outside Buckingham Palace better encapsulated the spirit of the country than any discussion. In a meticulously crafted statement, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Charles had designated Catherine as the only guardian of his own royal heritage. The person entrusted with managing and safeguarding private estates, archives, trusts, treasures, and family directives was known as a custodian. Camilla would not continue to have any administrative, financial, ceremonial, or advisory power after the king's passing, according to the proclamation. That was significant because the palace had eliminated any uncertainty. No covert second court could continue to exist behind the completed transfer. William openly stated that Catherine's duty was one of service rather than advancement. The future monarch was aware that his wife may seem victorious over a bereaved widow with only one thoughtless remark. Standing next to him, and gave the pronouncement a clear sense of authority. In a taped royal statement, the princess clarified that Charles's choice represented continuity rather than punishment. Camilla was by herself when she watched the first transmission. The presenter turned down the volume while discussing her previous abilities in the past tense. A few minutes later, the queen consort accompanied Charles on a pre-arranged appearance, walking behind him with poised dignity. The sadness that had already shown behind closed doors was something she did not want the audience to see. Though she didn't feel victorious, Catherine heard pundits refer to her as the monarchy's new center of gravity. In a secret taped chat, she informed William that every cheer appeared connected to Camilla's passing and Charles's deterioration. Even though it hurt, the prince reminded her that obligation sometimes came in the form of praise. One memorable front page from the Daily Chronicle encapsulated the split. Beneath the title, "The King's Last Trust," Catherine emerged with the archive key. A miniature picture of Camilla leaving Windsor was placed next to her. A private family breakup became a national judgment on one page. An old lady set 2 flowers up on the railings outside Buckingham Palace. A commentator interpreted the gesture as acknowledging that one lady had inherited responsibility while another had lost the future she had anticipated. White flowers had the phrases "for Catherine." Red roses bore the words "for Camilla." After that, Camilla issued a succinct written statement endorsing Charles's choice and pledging allegiance to William and Catherine. The private settlement had held, as shown by the lack of resentment. Charles called the family for one more balcony appearance as the controversy spread across the globe. With a single gesture, the monarch hoped to convey precisely how his last request should be remembered. Charles still had one more performance to do before the world's judgment was given in the form of crowds and headlines. An action that would transform debate into a last royal goodbye. There was no speech needed for Charles's farewell appearance. The king reached for Camilla's hand and then Catherine's, standing between the two ladies whose lives had been changed by his choice. He distinguished between power and love in that one gesture without rejecting either. Camilla was still his spouse. Catherine took on the role of preserving his legacy. William stood next to them, finally seeing that his father's dying desire was not intended to elevate one lady over another. After his voice was lost, it was intended to protect the monarchy. For one last public appearance, Charles gathered Camilla, William, Catherine, and Anne at his side. There was a purposeful significance to the arrangement. Catherine stood next to the future king as the person he trusted to guard the next chapter, while his wife stood by his side as the woman he loved. The legal sequence that determines who inherits the throne, known as the constitutional succession, has not altered. William's wife would protect the personal legacy that underpinned his rule. There was no resistance as Catherine finished the transfer. Charles's properties, archives, trusts, treasures, household appointments, and last wishes were all placed under her exclusive care. Rather of really holding the crown, a custodian was in charge of safeguarding and overseeing such resources. Camilla retained her house, title, money, safety, and personal belongings, but she was no longer in charge of any government. Later, Charles had a secret taped discussion with Camilla. He acknowledged that taking away her authority had been the most difficult choice he had made throughout his rule. The monarch still loved her, but he could no longer let love undermine the future he was in charge of safeguarding. In response, Camilla said that she should have trusted the position she already had in his heart rather than spending too much time attempting to gain control. Only when a formal vow was included to the final contract would Catherine accept the load. With William's advice, and supervision, and respect for Camilla's dignity, she pledged to use the inherited power. The future queen demonstrated that Charles had not selected a power-hungry person by converting total authority into responsible management. He had picked someone who was wary enough to be afraid of the repercussions. Later, inside the exclusive archive, Catherine opened the sealed letter. Charles clarified that he trusted her because she saw the distinction between having power and defending the authority that already existed. He cautioned that the monarchy could only endure when duty took precedence over selfish ambition. Following Charles's passing, Catherine, William, and Anne went to the archive door. After inserting the king's key into the lock, she hesitated and motioned for them to come in next to her. Everything was resolved by that decision. His trust would not turn into another private court, domination, or secrecy. Camilla stopped participating in home decisions, although she continued to attend Charles-related charities and family memorials. She was neither softly repaired nor openly annihilated. Firm limits, dignity, and no secret route back to power were all part of her future. Charles's last request did not make Camilla disappear from his heart or elevate Catherine over William. It put an end to a perilous conflict between duty and dread. Because Catherine never sought dominance, she inherited responsibilities. Because her insecurities had driven her beyond love, Camilla lost her power. Wounded yet unified over a single, distinct destiny, the monarchy arose. Thus, there was no competing claim, no secret power, and no unresolved conflict when the last chapter came to an end. The crown proceeded without uncertainty. Camilla remained the lady he loved, Catherine became his trusted guardian, and only Charles's final judgment was realized. I appreciate you watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next.